For decades, Diane Lane has built a reputation as one of Hollywood's most respected and intensely private actresses, rarely stepping into the glittering spotlight for anything beyond the parameters of her artistic work. But behind that carefully controlled and deeply guarded public image, persistent rumors and hushed whispers have followed her footsteps for years, especially when it comes to her complex relationships with prominent co-stars and powerful, influential men within the entertainment industry. From intense, palpable on-screen chemistry that left audiences breathless to dramatic off-screen speculation that kept the tabloid machines churning, the probing questions surrounding her private life have never fully gone away. Now, after years of absolute silence and maintaining a dignified distance from the gossip columns, she is finally opening up about what really happened behind closed doors, and perhaps more importantly, what absolutely did not happen. The early overwhelming fame that made everything intensely personal for her was a double-edged sword, cutting through her privacy before she even had a chance to build up proper emotional defenses against the onslaught of the media. Diane Lane's complex life story doesn't actually begin with salacious Hollywood rumors. Instead, it starts with a deeply fractured childhood that never allowed her to feel genuinely stable, safe, or truly grounded in the first place. Born in the chaotic, vibrant heart of New York City, she was immediately caught between two entirely different competing worlds before she could even walk. Her mother was an independent nightclub singer with a glamorous, free-spirited but highly unpredictable lifestyle that lacked structure, while her father worked multiple exhausting jobs, ranging from an acting coach to a humble cab driver, just to make ends meet and survive. When her parents separated just a few days after she was born, Lane's fragile life became a constant, dizzying shift between vastly different environments, never remaining fully grounded in one singular place long enough to develop a true sense of emotional security or belonging. That inherent domestic instability deeply shaped how she approached personal relationships later in her adult life, but it also inadvertently pushed her into the demanding world of professional acting at an unusually young age. By her early teenage years, she was already working consistently in the industry, gaining widespread critical attention and public adulation for her breakout role in the iconic film The Outsiders. What made her stand out so dramatically from her contemporaries wasn't just her raw talent, but an innate, haunting vulnerability that she carried into every single scene she shot. Hollywood directors immediately saw someone who could effortlessly convey emotional depth far beyond her actual chronological age, and that rare magnetic quality would later become both her greatest artistic strength and the primary reason audiences implicitly believed every romantic connection she portrayed. As her professional career accelerated at a breakneck pace, so did the terrifying intensity of the public attention focused squarely on her personal life. Unlike many young actresses who had ample time to gradually adjust to the pressures of stardom, Lane moved incredibly fast from being a promising, wide-eyed newcomer to a universally recognizable face in a highly demanding industry. That rapid, jarring transition came with an unexpected and deeply troubling side effect that would plague her for the rest of her career. People began to consistently blur the sharp line between her fictional silver screen roles and her actual, real-life existence, assuming that the passion they saw on screen must exist in reality. When she portrayed emotionally charged, highly passionate relationships on the big screen, viewers and critics alike automatically assumed there had to be something genuine happening behind the cameras. That persistent, underlying assumption followed her everywhere she went, turning every single project into a minefield of potential personal gossip. Every male co-star she shared a scene with instantly became a potential front-page headline for the predatory tabloid press, who were eager to manufacture a romance. Every single media interview she gave was meticulously analyzed by commentators looking for hidden meanings, subtle hints, or accidental slips about her private life. Because Lane was naturally introverted and fiercely private, her chosen strategy of dignified silence often made the surrounding rumors significantly worse rather than quelling them. Instead of constantly clarifying the endless stream of ridiculous rumors, she made a conscious choice to completely ignore them, genuinely believing that the quality of her work should speak for itself without needing personal explanations. But in an unforgiving industry driven almost entirely by speculation and manufactured drama, silence doesn't stop stories from spreading. Instead, it actively fuels them, creating a vacuum that the media is all too happy to fill with wild fiction. At the exact same time that her career was exploding, her personal life was already becoming increasingly complicated and difficult to manage for someone so young. At just 20 years old, she briefly dated rock star John Bon Jovi during a notoriously chaotic and exhausting period in his massive global touring career. The high-profile relationship lasted only 5 tumultuous months, but it abruptly exposed her to a completely different world of celebrity, one defined by constant travel, unpredictable schedules, and the kind of blinding public attention that never actually turns off. She would later describe the brief romance as a wonderful, exciting experience, but also one that belonged to a specific fleeting time in her youth, when she possessed far too much independence at too young an age, and lacked the necessary structure to guide her choices. That rock and roll relationship would later become one of the very first examples used by aggressive tabloids to definitively define her public image, even though she herself never presented it as anything more than a brief, youthful chapter. And that frustrating pattern would go on to repeat itself over and over again throughout the subsequent decades of her career. Small, insignificant pieces of truth would be deliberately taken out of context by the media, distorted, and expanded into something much larger, darker, and completely unrecognizable as her own life. By the time she entered her late 20s, Diane Lane wasn't just a working actress anymore. She had morphed into a blank canvas upon which the public projected their own dramatic narratives. Without even realizing it, the dangerous foundation had already been firmly set for decades of intense public speculation that she would eventually be forced to directly confront when her legendary on-screen chemistry turned into exhausting off-screen speculation. By the time Diane Lane entered the next distinct phase of her Hollywood career, the frustrating pattern of media projection had already begun to repeat itself in ways she couldn't fully control or halt. The more emotionally intense, raw, and convincing her dramatic performances became, the more the public started questioning whether what they were witnessing on screen was purely the result of great acting. It wasn't just innocent admiration from fans anymore. It had evolved into a dark, persistent speculation that followed her relentlessly from project to project without ever needing a shred of actual confirmation. Her early cinematic collaborations placed her alongside some of the most handsome, recognizable, and powerful actors in the entire entertainment industry, and those highly publicized partnerships naturally attracted an immense amount of voyeuristic attention. Audiences didn't just watch her movies for the plots. They meticulously analyzed her body language, her glances, and the spaces between her words. When Lane shared pivotal scenes that carried immense emotional weight or romantic tension, viewers routinely assumed there had to be a real simmering attraction beneath the surface. That dangerous assumption became even stronger when her critically acclaimed performances leaned heavily into complicated, messy relationships where raw attraction, psychological tension, and emotional vulnerability all coexisted simultaneously. To many casual observers, her acting felt far too authentic, far too intimate, and far too painful to be entirely fictional or rehearsed. What made the entire situation infinitely more complicated was the fact that Lane herself absolutely refused to play into the Hollywood publicity cycle. She didn't tease potential off-screen relationships to garner press attention for her upcoming films, and she rarely, if ever, addressed the mounting rumors directly in her press junkets. In a media environment where many calculating actors actively benefited from keeping romantic speculation alive to boost their box office numbers, her steadfast refusal to participate created a massive informational vacuum. And as history shows, in that media vacuum, wild narratives and completely fabricated stories formed effortlessly without her input or consent. During this highly active period of her life, her personal relationships also intersected with her professional world in complex ways that blurred boundaries even further than before. Her high-profile relationship with actor Christopher Lambert serves as a crystal-clear example of how quickly those professional lines could entirely disappear under the media spotlight. The two talented actors first met briefly while she was promoting a film, and although their initial connection didn't immediately last, they reconnected significantly later while working together on a project. Within a remarkably short period of time, their rekindled relationship intensified dramatically, ultimately leading them down the aisle to a sudden marriage. To casual outsiders in the entertainment press, it seemed like a classic fairy tale case of intense on-set chemistry naturally turning into something real and permanent. But what the public eagerly saw as a perfectly romantic Hollywood narrative was, in reality, far more complex, fragile, and difficult than anyone could have guessed. Lane wasn't entering this major relationship from a place of emotional simplicity or complete inner peace. She was already deeply shaped by years of childhood instability, forced independence, and intense emotional exposure through her demanding work. The rapid speed at which the relationship with Lambert developed wasn't just about simple physical attraction or Hollywood romance. It reflected a much deeper, subconscious search for something stable. She desperately craved something solid that could finally counterbalance the profound unpredictability and chaos she had known for the vast majority of her formative life. Even so, the reality of the marriage itself didn't shield her from the endless storm of public speculation. If anything, it added another complicated layer to it. Every new film she took on and every handsome new co-star she was cast opposite instantly became a fresh source of intense curiosity for the public and the press. The high-minded idea that an actress could form incredibly close, vulnerable emotional connections on screen while maintaining a completely separate, faithful private life seemed difficult for the public to fully reconcile. And so, the rumors continued to swirl unabated, not necessarily because there was any evidence of wrongdoing, but simply because of public expectation and desire for drama. At the exact same time, Lane was rapidly building an undeniable reputation within the industry for deliberately choosing roles that required immense emotional risk. She wasn't at all interested in playing safe, superficial characters or predictable, comfortable storylines that offered easy answers. Instead, she consistently gravitated toward dark, challenging projects that explored complicated relationships, moral ambiguity, betrayal, and deep internal conflict. That brave artistic choice significantly elevated her career and won her the respect of her peers, but it also inadvertently reinforced the public perception that her performances were being drawn directly from her personal experiences. People didn't just believe her acting, they convinced themselves that they were watching real pieces of her actual life unfold right before their eyes on the screen. As her marriage to Lambert eventually came to a quiet end, the media narrative surrounding her didn't fade away into obscurity. Instead, it merely shifted its focus. Rather than focusing solely on the brilliance of her artistic work, public attention began to center much more heavily on her post-divorce relationships, both confirmed and rumored. Because she continued to remain largely silent and refused to issue defensive press releases, those stories evolved entirely without course correction, becoming more detailed, more confident, and completely disconnected from actual reality. What very few people understood at the time was that Diane Lane wasn't avoiding the media conversation because she had scandalous secrets to hide from her fans. She was avoiding it because she fundamentally refused to let cheap tabloid speculation define the parameters of her artistic career or her value as a human being. But as the long years went on, that stubborn, principled decision to stay silent would come with a heavy emotional cost, one that would follow her into the most successful, celebrated, and intensely scrutinized period of her entire life. The pivotal role that changed absolutely everything for her would also be the one that intensified the rumors to a fever pitch. By the time Diane Lane reached the absolute peak of her career, she had already spent decades skillfully navigating the quiet, low-level speculation of the industry. But absolutely nothing could have prepared her for the explosion of scrutiny that occurred when she took on the cinematic role that would permanently redefine both her professional reputation and the way the world viewed her private life. When she stepped into the shoes of the character Connie Sumner in the psychological thriller Unfaithful, it wasn't just another acting job, it was a massive turning point. The film demanded a terrifying level of emotional, psychological, and physical vulnerability that very few mainstream Hollywood actresses were willing to take on at that point in their careers. Lane portrayed a seemingly happy suburban married woman who finds herself unexpectedly drawn into an incredibly intense, obsessive, and ultimately destructive extramarital affair, and she executed the role with a level of raw authenticity that left audiences completely unsettled. Viewers didn't just watch the tragic story unfold from a safe distance. They felt as though they were voyeuristically witnessing something deeply personal, private, and forbidden. Critics universally praised her performance as entirely fearless, groundbreaking, and raw, and prestigious award recognition followed almost immediately, elevating her into an elite category of actors. But while the film industry celebrated her undeniable artistic triumph, the general public's response took a much more invasive and problematic direction. The sheer shocking intensity of her performance sparked immediate rampant speculation about her real-life fidelity and her personal relationships outside the theater. People began asking highly invasive questions that had absolutely nothing to do with the craft of acting and everything to do with wild personal assumption. How could any actress portray that specific level of overwhelming desire, guilt, and emotional conflict so convincingly unless it came directly from personal experience? Was there something hidden in her own private life that perfectly mirrored the infidelity and longing that audiences were seeing on the screen? Those toxic questions didn't just stay confined to casual conversations among moviegoers. They rapidly became sensationalized headlines, invasive interview questions, and ongoing cultural discussions that followed her long after the film's release. And because Lane still stubbornly chose not to publicly dissect her personal life for the masses, the speculation continued to grow entirely without resistance or boundaries. What had once been occasional, mild curiosity from fans now turned into a persistent, damaging media narrative that her most powerful performances were actually secret reflections of hidden truths. At the exact same time, her career was expanding in ways that placed her under an even greater, more suffocating microscope than she had ever experienced before. She had already proven herself capable of handling complex roles, but now she was doing so at the absolute highest level of global recognition and box office power. Every single project she chose after that monumental success carried an added weight, not just because of her immense talent, but because of the heavy expectations that came with her new status. Audiences weren't just watching her characters live out stories anymore. They were actively looking for hidden clues about her real personality. That hypervigilant environment made even her most mundane professional collaborations significantly more complicated and tense than they needed to be. Whether she was working alongside long-established Hollywood icons or young, rising stars, any slight sign of natural chemistry on set was instantly flagged by the media as a potential romance. It didn't matter in the slightest whether there was any real, factual basis for the rumors. The mere perception of chemistry was more than enough to create a story. In an industry where fictional narratives move exponentially faster than cold, hard facts, her incredible ability to connect deeply with her co-stars became both her greatest artistic asset and her biggest personal liability. What made this specific period of her life particularly challenging was that from Lane's own internal perspective, absolutely nothing about her professional approach had changed. She was still choosing her acting roles based entirely on their emotional depth, still committing her heart and soul fully to the characters she portrayed, but the way those choices were interpreted by the world had fundamentally shifted. Instead of being seen purely as a dedicated actress doing her job with immense skill, she was increasingly viewed through the distorted lens of tabloid speculation, as if every performance carried a hidden, scandalous confession. And yet, true to her core character, she never publicly pushed back in an aggressive way that would satisfy the media's unquenchable thirst for drama. She didn't issue frantic denials for every rumor, nor did she attempt to aggressively control or manipulate the narrative surrounding her name. Instead, she simply continued working diligently, allowing her brilliant performances to stand entirely on their own merits. To some cynical observers, that complete silence was willfully interpreted as a tacit confirmation of guilt. To others, it was clearly recognized as a sign of immense personal discipline, dignity, and self-respect. But regardless of how people chose to interpret it, her silence ensured that the intense conversation around her private life would never fully disappear from Hollywood. As the overwhelming media attention surrounding her career reached its highest historical point, so did the immense personal pressure she felt on a daily basis. The exact same complex role that had brought her well-deserved critical acclaim and an Oscar nomination also drastically intensified the invasive scrutiny she had spent her entire life trying to avoid. And while the watching public genuinely believed they were getting closer to truly understanding the enigmatic actress, the truth of her life was far more complicated, nuanced, and private than anyone realized. The marriage that looked remarkably stable on the outside but wasn't on the inside was just around the corner. After years of navigating wild speculation, emotionally intense roles, and a growing public narrative that never quite matched her internal reality, Diane Lane appeared to enter a brand new chapter that seemed, at least from the distant perspective of the public, far more grounded and peaceful. When she met fellow actor Josh Brolin through an introduction by the legendary Barbra Streisand, the connection didn't seem to carry the same chaotic, unstable energy that had unfortunately defined earlier periods of her life. It felt significantly simpler, more mature, more aligned with her values, and for a beautiful period of time, it genuinely was a safe haven for her. Brolin himself would later describe their relationship in its early stages as something authentic that didn't rely on Hollywood expectations or industry fake glamour to survive. Neither of them needed the blinding glare of the spotlight to validate what they shared privately, and that rare, shared perspective created a profound sense of mutual balance. When they finally married at his beautiful, secluded ranch, the wedding wasn't framed as a massive Hollywood spectacle for the cameras. It was presented to the world as something deeply personal, quiet, and deliberately removed from the deafening noise that had surrounded Lane for so many years. After everything she had tragically experienced in her childhood and early adulthood, this union wasn't supposed to be just another temporary Hollywood relationship. It was supposed to be the definitive one that actually worked out for the long haul. But the hidden reality of that marriage was infinitely more complicated and painful than the pristine image it projected to the media. Not long after their beautiful wedding, a highly publicized domestic dispute occurred at their home, leading to Brolin being abruptly arrested on a misdemeanor charge that shocked fans. Lane ultimately chose not to press charges against her husband, and the unfortunate situation was quickly described to the public as a minor misunderstanding that had gotten out of hand. To outsiders looking in, it was viewed as a brief, regrettable disruption in an otherwise incredibly stable and loving relationship. But moments of that gravity never truly exist in complete isolation. They leave a lasting, painful impression on a marriage, even when both people involved deeply love each other and consciously choose to forgive and move forward. And for a while, the couple genuinely did move forward together, working hard to rebuild their trust and protect their shared life from the media. By the following years, Lane spoke quite openly in rare interviews about feeling a deep sense of security in the relationship, warmly describing Brolin as someone who brought immense strength, grounding energy, and reassurance into her often chaotic life. That hard-won sense of marital security wasn't something she took lightly or took for granted. Having already gone through a painful previous divorce with Christopher Lambert and understanding intimately how domestic instability could negatively affect not just her own mental health, but also her beloved daughter, she approached this marriage with a level of caution and dedication that shaped her every choice. She wasn't looking for a temporary romance. She wanted a lasting, permanent partnership. That deep intention made what ultimately came later even more difficult for her to emotionally process and accept. From the outside world, there was absolutely no single, explosive defining moment that easily explained the sudden end of their decade-long marriage. There was no clear, singular event that could be pointed to by the media as the definitive cause of the split. Instead, the relationship unfolded gradually and quietly, in the bittersweet way that many long-term marriages unfortunately do when two people slowly grow apart. After more than a full decade together as husband and wife, they officially announced their separation, and the explanation given publicly to the media was remarkably simple and concise. The relationship had simply run its course. But even that clean, polite phrase doesn't begin to capture the immense emotional toll of walking away from something that once felt like a permanent anchor. Around the exact time of their painful separation, Brolin was unfortunately involved in another highly public incident on New Year's Eve, where he was detained by authorities for public intoxication. While absolutely no criminal charges followed the incident, the terrible timing added another suffocating layer of media attention to a personal situation that was already incredibly difficult for Lane to endure. The messy public details didn't completely define the parameters of their breakup, but they certainly contributed heavily to the broader media narrative that the marriage had been under immense strain behind the scenes for a long time. What stands out most profoundly in Lane's dignified approach to this painful period of her life is not what she said to the press, but what she consciously chose not to say. She didn't offer a detailed, salacious explanation to the entertainment magazines, she didn't assign vitriolic blame to her ex-husband, and she absolutely refused to engage in the kind of public, messy unraveling that so often accompanies high-profile Hollywood divorces. Instead, she maintained the exact same ironclad, respectful boundary she had always kept since her childhood. Her deeply personal life would absolutely not become a cheap public spectacle for the masses, even when the painful circumstances made it incredibly easy for others to turn her pain into profit. And yet, despite her admirable restraint and dignity, the media speculation didn't stop for a moment. If anything, it merely shifted its trajectory once again. The focus of the gossip columns moved rapidly from her acclaimed acting performances and rumored co-star connections to her fundamental ability to maintain a long-term relationship at all. The interview questions became significantly more pointed, more deeply personal, and less connected to the brilliant work she was doing on screen. It was no longer just about who she might have been romantically involved with on a movie set. It became a harsh judgment about why her marriages didn't last. By the time her second marriage officially ended, Diane Lane had already spent decades of her life being constantly observed, overinterpreted, and fundamentally misunderstood by the public. But this painful chapter added something entirely new to her life experience: the bittersweet realization that even when a relationship appears incredibly stable, it can still quietly come apart from the inside out. Part 2. When the glittering facade of a seemingly perfect Hollywood life finally cracks, the watching public rarely takes the time to look at the intricate structural nuances hidden beneath the surface of the headline. Instead, they quickly consume the superficial narrative presented to them, completely oblivious to the quiet strength it takes for an individual to hold themselves together in the midst of a public storm. For Diane Lane, the end of her marriage to Josh Brolin wasn't just a personal failure to be dissected by strangers. It was a deeply private grief that had to be navigated under the unblinking, judgmental eye of the global media. The constant, intrusive questioning about her personal life had evolved over the decades from a minor professional annoyance into a heavy, suffocating weight that threatened to obscure her incredible body of work. Yet even as the tabloid press sharpened their pens to write the definitive, tragic story of her love life, Lane refused to afford them the satisfaction of seeing her fall apart or lash out in anger. She understood with absolute clarity that in the cynical world of celebrity journalism, any emotional reaction, any defensive statement, or any tearful denial would simply be weaponized against her to extend the news cycle. Her well-earned reputation for privacy wasn't an accidental trait or a marketing gimmick designed to create an aura of mystery. It was a carefully constructed survival strategy that she had been forced to develop from the very inception of her career. Having been thrust into the professional entertainment industry at an age when most young girls are safely navigating the simple social hierarchies of middle school, she learned early on that the public is a fickle master. They will enthusiastically celebrate your vulnerability on screen while simultaneously exploiting that exact same vulnerability the moment you step off the set. This harsh reality became even more pronounced as she transitioned into mature, complex adult roles that challenged traditional societal norms regarding female desire and agency. The media's persistent inability to separate her brilliant performances from her actual moral character was a source of constant frustration, yet she carried that burden with a rare grace that few of her contemporaries could emulate. She watched in silence as lesser actors built entire careers out of carefully orchestrated public scandals, choosing instead to anchor her life in the quiet, steady discipline of her beloved craft. The profound dichotomy between her fiery, uninhibited on-screen presence and her intensely reserved, quiet off-screen persona continued to baffle and intrigue Hollywood commentators for years. They simply could not comprehend how an actress could manifest such terrifyingly realistic passion, jealousy, and heartache in front of a camera lens without actively living out those exact same chaotic emotions in her private hours. This fundamental misunderstanding of the Stanislavski acting method, or the simple nature of creative empathy, led to an endless stream of manufactured rumors that tied her name to nearly every leading man she shared a frame with. If she looked at a co-star with genuine, simulated adoration during a romantic scene, the press immediately proclaimed that a secret, passionate affair was blossoming behind the scenes. If she maintained a professional, polite distance from a male colleague during a red carpet premiere, those same commentators would gleefully claim that a bitter, dramatic feud was tearing the production apart. It was a lose-lose situation that would have driven a less grounded individual to complete exhaustion, but Lane possessed a unique internal compass forged in the fire of her unconventional upbringing. That unconventional upbringing, marked by her parents' sudden separation and her mother's highly unpredictable, bohemian lifestyle, had inadvertently gifted her with a powerful psychological armor. She had learned from a very tender age to find peace within her own mind, entirely independent of her turbulent external surroundings or the shifting opinions of the adults around her. When the glamorous but dangerous world of Hollywood attempted to dictate who she was, she fell back on that childhood lesson, refusing to let external voices define her self-worth. This internal resilience became her saving grace when her high-profile relationship with rock icon Jon Bon Jovi became a permanent fixture of pop culture trivia. Decades after the brief five-month romance had naturally fizzled out due to youth and conflicting schedules, journalists would still lazily bring up his name in interviews, hoping to extract some scandalous new detail or a retrospective confession of regret. Lane always handled these predictable inquiries with a cool, detached politeness that completely diffused the interviewer's sensationalist intentions. She refused to romanticize the past, nor would she demonize it, choosing instead to present it as a normal, fleeting experience of youth that had simply been magnified by the lens of celebrity. The media's obsession with her romantic past was not merely a reflection of her celebrity status. It was a testament to the enduring power of her cinematic image as the ultimate object of complex desire. Following her universally acclaimed performance in Unfaithful, she became a symbol of a very specific kind of modern, adult vulnerability that resonated deeply with audiences worldwide. The film had struck a raw, sensitive nerve in the cultural zeitgeist, and because her portrayal of Connie Sumner was so utterly devoid of theatrical vanity, people genuinely felt they were watching a real woman's soul unravel. This profound connection between the audience and the character created a strange, psychological phenomenon where fans felt entitled to know the intimate details of Lane's personal views on fidelity, love, and temptation. The boundary between the fictional character's moral failures and the actress's private ethics became completely non-existent in the public imagination. She was suddenly expected to be an expert on the complexities of human relationships, facing questions that were far better suited for a licensed marriage counselor than a working film actress. Throughout this intense period of heightened public scrutiny, Lane found solace and grounded stability in her primary role as a devoted mother to her daughter, Eleanor. This vital parental responsibility provided her with a healthy, everyday reality that was entirely removed from the superficial glamour and toxic gossip of the Hollywood ecosystem. When the pressure of the industry became too intense to bear, she could simply step away from the cameras and immerse herself in the ordinary, beautiful routines of motherhood, finding a true purpose that no Oscar nomination or critical praise could ever hope to replicate. Her daughter became her ultimate anchor, the primary reason she fought so fiercely to keep her home life entirely free from the contamination of tabloid journalism. She was determined to provide Eleanor with the stable, consistent, and peaceful childhood that she herself had been tragically denied by her own parents' fractured choices. This fierce maternal protectiveness further solidified her resolve to never participate in the vulgar publicity stunts or strategic personal disclosures that many of her Hollywood peers utilized to stay relevant in the news. Her marriage to Josh Brolin had been a genuine, heartfelt attempt to build a lasting sanctuary that could withstand the unique pressures of two high-profile Hollywood careers. For a significant time, it truly seemed as though they had beaten the odds, creating a beautiful life on their secluded ranch that was defined by mutual respect, shared artistic passions, and a love for the rugged, unpretentious beauty of nature. They were not a couple that frequented the trendy Hollywood hotspots or allowed reality television cameras into their private spaces. They preferred the quiet company of close friends and the peaceful rhythm of rural life. However, the unique pressures of the entertainment industry, combined with the complex personal histories that both individuals brought into the union, eventually created fractures that could not be easily repaired by love alone. The public arrest of Brolin early in their marriage was a deeply painful and embarrassing ordeal for an actress who valued privacy above all else, yet she handled the media firestorm with her characteristic dignity and restraint. She stood by her husband publicly, refusing to allow the legal system or the court of public opinion to dictate the private terms of their healing process. When the marriage finally dissolved a decade later, the absolute lack of public bitterness or dramatic accusations from either party was a rare anomaly in a town famous for its toxic, drawn-out celebrity divorces. Lane's choice to remain silent during the painful transition was a profound statement of self-respect and an ultimate refusal to degrade the genuine love they had once shared for the entertainment of strangers. She understood that a marriage is a vast, complex ecosystem that cannot be accurately summarized by a paragraph in a gossip magazine or a sensationalized headline on a website. The quiet dissolution of her marriage did not signify a lack of effort or a casual attitude toward her vows. Rather, it was the painful realization that sometimes, despite two people's best intentions, paths must naturally diverge for individual growth to occur. In the aftermath of the high-profile split, she threw herself back into her work with a renewed sense of purpose and artistic dedication, choosing roles that allowed her to explore the complex themes of reinvention, aging, and resilience. She refused to allow the label of a twice-divorced woman to define her identity or limit her future prospects for happiness and fulfillment. Instead, she embraced her status as a mature, independent woman who had survived the worst of the Hollywood meat grinder and emerged with her integrity, her talent, and her dignity completely intact. The lessons she had learned through decades of intense public observation had transformed her from a vulnerable young girl into a formidable, self-reliant woman who knew exactly who she was. She no longer felt the exhausting need to prove anything to the industry, the critics, or the voyeuristic public, finding an immense, liberating freedom in her own self-validation. Her artistic choices became even more daring and eclectic, as she deliberately stepped away from the traditional leading lady roles to embrace complex ensemble pieces, independent films, and powerful theater productions that challenged her creative boundaries. She proved to the world that an actress's value does not expire when she reaches a certain age or when her marital status changes, dismantling the archaic Hollywood biases with every brilliant performance she delivered. As the cultural landscape slowly began to change with the rise of digital media and the relentless 24-hour news cycle, the nature of celebrity gossip underwent a dramatic and dangerous evolution. The traditional tabloid magazines were rapidly replaced by aggressive paparazzi websites and unchecked social media platforms that demanded an unprecedented level of access to celebrities' private moments. For an actress of Lane's deeply private disposition, this new digital frontier was a minefield of potential privacy violations that required even greater vigilance and strategic withdrawal. She steadfastly refused to join popular social media platforms, completely rejecting the modern notion that an artist must constantly share their private thoughts, meals, and family moments to maintain a loyal fan base. This total refusal to connect digitally only enhanced her unique aura of classic old-school Hollywood mystique, making her rare public appearances and interviews feel significantly more meaningful, authentic, and impactful. She remained a glorious throwback to an era when movie stars were larger-than-life figures whose private lives were kept behind a velvet curtain, rather than modern influencers who live their lives in a state of perpetual public performance. When she did occasionally choose to speak to the media during this period, her words were always carefully measured, insightful, and entirely focused on the nuances of her artistic process rather than the salacious details of her personal history. She possessed a rare ability to gracefully guide an intrusive interviewer away from gossip and back to the cinematic craft, subtly reminding the public that her primary value lay in her extraordinary talent as an actress, not her romantic associations. She spoke passionately about the vital importance of representation for mature women in cinema, the psychological challenges of embodying complex characters, and the enduring power of visual storytelling to unite disparate communities. Through her dignified public conduct, she set a powerful and inspiring example for younger generations of actresses who were struggling to navigate the toxic, invasive demands of modern celebrity culture. She demonstrated conclusively that it is entirely possible to maintain a highly successful, decades-long career at the highest levels of Hollywood without ever sacrificing one's personal dignity, privacy, or core values to the media machine. Her complex relationship with her own past became a source of deep philosophical reflection rather than regret or bitterness. She viewed her early struggles, her brief rock and roll romance, her complex marriages, and her intense professional triumphs not as separate, fragmented chapters, but as essential, interconnected pieces of a beautiful, complicated tapestry that made her the artist she was today. She recognized that the profound vulnerability that had made her a star as a teenager was the exact same quality that had made her private life so intensely susceptible to public speculation and projection. Instead of hardening her heart against the world to protect herself from further pain, she made a conscious, brave choice to remain emotionally open and receptive, both in her artistic work and her private interactions. This remarkable emotional bravery is what ultimately allowed her to continue delivering deeply moving, critically acclaimed performances that resonated with audiences on a profound human level. She understood that to close oneself off from the possibility of pain is to also close oneself off from the possibility of great art and true human connection. The lingering rumors regarding her alleged off-screen romances with various high-profile co-stars eventually began to lose their destructive power as the years rolled on, exposed as the flimsy, manufactured fantasies they had always been. Audiences and critics alike finally began to realize that the breathtaking chemistry they witnessed on screen was not a scandalous clue of an illicit affair, but rather the definitive proof of an actress at the absolute height of her creative powers. It was an ultimate validation of her extraordinary talent, a clear demonstration that she could create a completely believable, deeply intimate universe with another human being purely through the magic of her acting. Her brilliant ability to make the fictional feel absolutely real was no longer viewed as a personal liability, but as a rare, transcendent gift that set her apart from her peers. The public narrative that had sought to reduce her to a tragic, complicated figure of Hollywood gossip slowly but surely dissolved, replaced by a deep, universal respect for her enduring career and her unyielding personal integrity. Part 3. True wisdom in life often manifests as the complete refusal to participate in an argument that was manufactured entirely by people who do not know your heart. For Diane Lane, reaching a place of total peace meant finally standing up and addressing the decades of surrounding rumors, not with the defensive anger of a victim, but with the calm, devastating clarity of an artist who understands the true nature of her medium. When she finally chose to break her long silence regarding the endless speculation about her romantic life, she did so in a way that completely subverted the expectations of the entertainment media. She did not provide a list of names, she did not issue emotional denials, and she certainly did not apologize for any of her life choices. Instead, she held up a mirror to the public and the media, gently but firmly explaining how their own collective desires, projections, and misunderstandings had created a vast fictional mythology around her name that had almost nothing to do with her actual reality. She reframed the entire conversation from a scandalous piece of personal gossip into a profound, insightful lecture on the psychological mechanics of cinematic storytelling and the unique vulnerability of the actor's craft. She pointed out with immense insight that when an audience watches two actors create a beautifully intense, emotionally raw, and completely believable connection on the silver screen, there is a natural human desire to want that magic to extend beyond the boundaries of the film itself. This deep-seated desire for authenticity makes the story feel infinitely more meaningful and permanent to the viewer, but it also leads to a dangerous form of psychological projection where fans aggressively fill in the blanks of an actress's private life with their own romantic fantasies. Over the course of many decades, These unverified assumptions gradually harden into concrete cultural narratives that become nearly impossible to completely undo or correct through simple denials. Lane's own career had been a textbook example of this frustrating phenomenon, starting from her very first professional roles as a vulnerable teenager in New York and extending to her major Hollywood triumphs. She had watched with a mixture of amusement and exhaustion as completely innocent. Professional workspace relationships were instantly reinterpreted by the media as intense, passionate off-screen love affairs without a single shred of factual evidence. The public simply could not accept the simple, beautiful truth that an actress could possess the extraordinary skill to manufacture profound intimacy on command purely through her imagination, her training, and her deep empathy for the human condition. When she gracefully reflected on her highly publicized past relationships, including her brief, legendary romance with rock star John Bon Jovi, she did so with a refreshing groundedness that completely removed the manufactured mystery that had kept the story alive in the public imagination for decades. She didn't present the relationship as a tragic case of lost love or a dramatic Hollywood scandal. She described it simply as a short, youthful, and exciting experience that belonged to a very specific fleeting moment in her life when she had too much freedom and not enough structure. By stripping the romance of its tabloid sensationalism, she effectively disarmed the gossip industry, proving that the reality of her life was far more ordinary, sensible, and healthy than the wild fictions written about her. She also bravely acknowledged that her own lifelong commitment to absolute silence had inadvertently played a significant role in how those damaging rumors had developed and mutated over the years. By making a conscious, principled choice to never engage with or respond to public speculation, she had unintentionally allowed a vast army of tabloid writers and anonymous sources to shape her public narrative entirely in her absence. But she made it explicitly clear that this fateful choice was never made out of a sense of fear, guilt, or avoidance of the truth. Rather, it was a deliberate, protective decision designed to safeguard something she considered absolutely essential to her survival: her fundamental ability to separate her artistic work from her private human existence. For Lane, maintaining that strict, unyielding boundary wasn't just about avoiding embarrassing headlines. It was about protecting the very integrity and purity of what she did as a professional actress. She understood that if the audience knows every single mundane detail, every private struggle, and every romantic entanglement of an actress's real life, it becomes significantly more difficult for them to suspend their disbelief and truly see the character she is portraying on screen. Her privacy was the sacred soil from which her diverse characters grew, and she was willing to let the media misinterpret her silence if it meant preserving her creative power. At the exact same time, she did not attempt to present herself to the world as an untouchable, unfeeling goddess who was completely immune to the painful consequences of those persistent media narratives. She openly acknowledged that public perception can have a profound, lasting influence not only on your professional career opportunities, but also on your real-world personal relationships and your mental well-being. She knew all too well that being constantly associated with unverified rumors and manufactured scandals could subtly shape how directors cast you, how peers treat you, and how audiences interpret your most vulnerable artistic choices. But instead of wasting her precious time and emotional energy trying to frantically correct every single misunderstanding or sue every tabloid, she chose to focus entirely on the few things she could actually control: the absolute consistency of her work, the kindness of her actions, and the integrity of the life she chose to live behind closed doors. What ultimately emerges from her mature, retrospective response to the world is not a defensive legal brief or a cry for pity, but a magnificent, empowering redefinition of her entire existence. Instead of allowing decades of cheap rumors to dictate how her life story is told to future generations, she successfully shifted the focus back to where it always belonged: her extraordinary craft, her resilience, and her absolute victory over the Hollywood system. She stands today as a triumphant, inspiring figure who proved that a woman can navigate the most toxic eras of celebrity culture without losing her soul, her dignity, or her privacy to the public domain. Her story is a powerful reminder that the truth of a human life cannot be captured by the superficial gaze of a camera or the cruel words of a gossip column. It exists in the quiet, unseen moments of love, motherhood, and self-reflection that happen far away from the blinding lights of the stage. Diane Lane has successfully reclaimed her own narrative, not by changing the past, but by masterfully outlasting the noise of the present and embracing the beautiful, hard-won piece of her future. As she continues to grace the screen with her incomparable presence, audiences no longer look for hidden clues or scandalous secrets. They simply look in absolute awe at an artist who conquered Hollywood on her own strict terms. The journey from a vulnerable child caught between unstable worlds to a legendary, fiercely independent icon of American cinema was never an easy path, but every obstacle she faced only served to deepen the well of her artistic talent. She converted her personal heartaches, her public embarrassments, and the constant pressure of speculation into a beautiful fuel for her performances, gifting the world with characters that feel entirely alive, complex, and human. Her legacy is not one of tabloid headlines or broken marriages, but of an unwavering, lifelong commitment to artistic truth and personal honor that stands as a bright beacon for anyone navigating their own public or private storms. She has earned the rare right to look back on her long career with immense pride, knowing that she never once compromised her core values, never sold her privacy for temporary fame, and never allowed the expectations of a cynical industry to diminish the bright, vulnerable light within her. In the end, the whispers and rumors that once threatened to define her have completely faded into insignificant background noise, completely eclipsed by the magnificent, enduring reality of her life and art. Her beautifully grounded perspective on her past allows her to mentor the next generation of actors with an authentic empathy that can only be forged through decades of surviving the unique pressures of stardom. She frequently emphasizes to young artists the vital importance of building a rich, substantive life outside the parameters of the entertainment industry, reminding them that fame is a fleeting, unreliable illusion, while character and self-respect are permanent. Her life stands as a masterful blueprint for how to successfully cultivate an enduring creative career while fiercely maintaining the boundaries necessary to protect one's mental and emotional health. She has beautifully demonstrated that true power does not lie in controlling what thousands of strangers think about you, but in having absolute certainty about who you are when the cameras are turned off and the costumes are put away. The profound respect she commands today within the global film community is a direct result of her decades of quiet discipline, her spectacular artistic choices, and her refusal to allow her private life to be commercialized. As she moves forward into the next exciting chapters of her life, there is an undeniable, radiant sense of liberation that surrounds her every public appearance and artistic endeavor. She is an actress who has completely transcended the traditional limiting categories of age and marital status that Hollywood historically used to diminish mature female talent, carving out a unique, permanent space that is entirely her own. Her brilliant body of work continues to grow more diverse and compelling with each passing year, reflecting the deep wisdom, emotional complexity, and unyielding strength of a woman who has truly seen it all and emerged victorious. The public has finally learned to appreciate Diane Lane for the extraordinary creative force she has always been, leaving the silly rumors of the past in the dustbin of history where they belong. Her magnificent journey remains a timeless testament to the enduring power of dignity, the triumph of artistic integrity over cheap sensationalism, and the beautiful freedom that comes from living your life completely out loud on your own terms.